Let me tell you about Xiao Yang. And let me be very clear from the start that everything that happens to this man is his own fault, and also none of his fault, and he is simultaneously the most unlucky and most accidentally gifted person in the history of the Qingyun sect, possibly in the history of cultivation in general. He is not a hero, he is not a villain. He is a man who got slapped across the face by a female elder and somehow turned it into a cultivation breakthrough, and then kept going. It started on the morning of the outer sect assembly. The Qingyun sect had a rule. Outer disciples who hadn't reached the 6th stage of qi condensation by their 19th birthday were expelled. No exceptions, no appeals, no mercy. Today was that day. The outer disciples filed into the main hall in the specific anxious formation of people waiting to hear if their name would be called. Elder Xiaqingqiu presided over the assembly with the calm authority of someone who has expelled enough people to stop feeling bad about it. Name by name she went through the list. Name by name the faces of the condemned fell, and when she reached Xiaoyang's name, he was still asleep. Not metaphorically, actually asleep. He had been having what he would later describe as a very good dream, and the sound of his name being called filtered through the dream as something that could be safely ignored. And so he ignored it. Right up until Elder Xia walked through his door. She was already in a mood. The assembly had run long and she had too many things to do, and the sight of this particular outer disciple still horizontal at 9 in the morning, while his expulsion was being processed above him, did not improve her emotional state. She looked at him sleeping. She looked at the small, glowing orbs drifting around his bed space, orbs that she, as a cultivator at a level most people only read about in theoretical texts, could perceive as concentrated attribute energy of extraordinary quality. She looked back at the sleeping disciple. She slapped him across the face. He woke up. And in the confused, startled, half-awake moment between the slap landing and his brain fully registering what had happened, his hand shot out instinctively and made contact with one of the glowing orbs floating near her shoulder. The orb dissolved into him. He felt it, a surge of energy moving through his meridians like electricity, immediate and comprehensive, and unlike anything he had experienced in 6 years of failed cultivation. His eyes went wide. He looked at his hand. He looked at Elder Xia. He said absolutely nothing because there was nothing to say. She told him he was being expelled. He asked if he could stay. She left. The orbs were everywhere. That was the thing he discovered in the next 20 minutes. They had always been everywhere, had probably been everywhere his entire life, and he had simply been looking in the wrong way to see them. Now he could see them. Every person had them, floating in soft luminescent clusters around their bodies, each cluster corresponding to some aspect of their cultivation, their physical strength, their natural aptitudes. He sat in his room and looked at his own hands and thought, I have been trying to cultivate for 6 years through meditation and breathing exercises and manual study, and none of it worked. And now, by complete accident, I appear to have developed the ability to steal people's cultivation attributes by touching them. He thought about this for a moment. He said out loud, to the empty room, this seems like something I should keep to myself. He did not keep it to himself. He kept it to himself for approximately 4 minutes, which was how long it took for his Shixiong Jiang Hao to walk in and find him sitting cross-legged on the bed, making faces at something only he could see. Jiang Hao was built like a very confident mountain and had the disposition of someone who had been told his entire life that he was impressive and had decided to believe it. He looked at Xiao with the specific expression that he used for situations he had decided were someone else's problem. He said, Sect Master dismissed you? Xiao said, not yet. Jiang Hao said, why do you look like that? Xiao said, like what? Jiang Hao said, like you're trying very hard to look normal. Xiao said, I always look like this. Jiang Hao did not believe this and said so. Xiao chose this moment to reach out and touch the edge of one of the orbs floating around Jiang Hao's shoulder. Jiang Hao said, why are you touching me? Xiao withdrew his hand. The orb had dissolved into him, a different texture from the first one, warmer, denser, tasting of something his body recognized as strength. He said, "No reason." Zhang Hao said, "You're doing something weird." Gu Xiaoyang said, "I'm really not." Zhang Hao said, "You absolutely are." Then Zhang Hao's orbs responded to having been touched, and Zhang Hao felt a brief, inexplicable tremor run through his cultivation, and he turned and left the room quickly because he was a man who processed confusing feelings by departing the location that generated them. Gu Xiaoyang sat alone and thought, "This is going to be a problem." He was not wrong. The next several hours produced a sequence of events that would later be remembered, by everyone who witnessed them, as one of the more chaotic mornings in Qingyun sect history. Word had gotten around that the elder Xia had administered a disciplinary slap to an outer disciple, and that the outer disciple had, instead of the expected response of chastisement and apology, done something in return that caused the elder to leave with an unusual expression on her face. The nature of this something was unclear, and therefore the rumors were creative. Some said he had grabbed her. Some said he had accidentally activated a technique. Some said the outer disciple in question had, in his startled state, done something that no junior cultivator would normally dare to do to a sect elder. All three of these versions were circulating simultaneously by noon, and all of them had the same conclusion: Gu Xiaoyang was finished. The sect gossip reached consensus that he was either expelled, imprisoned, or possessed by a female ghost that was specifically attracted to male cultivators of poor quality. The third theory was the most popular because it was the most interesting. Gu Xiaoyang was unaware of his evolving reputation. He was in the outer disciple training ground, systematically working his way through as many orbs as he could reach, without making it obvious what he was doing. His method was developing in real time. He had discovered that approaching the orbs too directly caused people to feel something odd and look at him, so he had refined his technique into something that resembled incidental contact, brushing past someone, turning quickly, adjusting his position in a crowd. Each orb he absorbed felt different. The vitality orbs felt like warm water filling him from the inside. The strength orbs felt like his muscles tightening and then releasing in a wave. The elemental orbs were more complex. Water-type energy moved through him like a current. Fire-type energy sparked at the edges of his consciousness. He absorbed whatever he could reach and felt his cultivation, which had refused to move for 6 years, begin to build with the enthusiasm of water finding holes in a dam. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't the classical path described in cultivation manuals. It was objectively theft. Attribute theft conducted with the casual efficiency of someone who has decided that necessity and opportunity have aligned and is acting accordingly. He absorbed a cluster of earth attribute orbs from an unsuspecting outer disciple. He absorbed a vitality cluster from a senior brother who was distracted. He absorbed a water affinity cluster from someone whose cultivation had been stagnant for months and who would, after this encounter, find that stagnation mysteriously resolved. He was performing accidental public service while committing accidental larceny, and this balance seemed to him broadly acceptable. By midday, he had absorbed enough orbs to feel the 6th stage boundary approaching. The blockage between the 5th and 6th stages, which had held him for 2.5 years, had been reduced from an impassable wall to something that felt navigable. All he needed was one more significant cluster. He was running the options in his head when Elder Xia appeared. She had been looking for him. She had specific things to say to him about his continued presence in the sect. She had not come to interact with his strange orb-related situation, but she had not come peacefully either. Gu Xiaoyang, seeing her approach, saw also the 3 large, brilliant orbs circling near her. He recognized the largest one, the Yuan-Qi root-type orb, which his instincts told him would provide not just cultivation energy, but something deeper, something related to foundation quality. He wanted it badly. He also recognized that reaching for an elder's orbs was not a decision he could make openly. He made a calculation. He walked toward her, and as he passed within reach, he exhaled slowly and deliberately allowed his instinct to activate. His hand moved. The orb made contact. Elder Xia felt something. The orb dissolved into him and his cultivation erupted. 6th stage. He had reached sixth-stage chi condensation standing in front of the elder who had come to expel him for failing to reach sixth-stage chi condensation. He stopped walking. He turned around. He said, "Elder, I believe I have just reached sixth stage." Elder Xia looked at him. She said, "I know." She had felt what happened. She said, "How?" He said, "I cultivated very hard." She said, "That's not what happened." He said, "It was a combination of factors." She looked at him for a long moment with the expression of someone who is deciding whether to pursue a line of inquiry that she suspects will be complicated. She said, "Fine, you've reached sixth stage. You can remain." She turned to leave. She turned back. She said, "You absorbed one of my root-type orbs." He said, "I don't know what you're talking about." She looked at him. He looked back at her with the specific expression of someone maintaining a position through willpower alone. She said, "Come find me in the inner hall." She said, "We need to talk about your cultivation method." She left. He exhaled. He thought, this could have gone worse. The subsequent days were defined by Gu Xiaoyang's escalating reputation and escalating complications. The reputation problem was this: he had been seen, multiple times, moving through crowds of his fellow disciples, in ways that made the people around him feel strange. He had been seen making physical contact with people, under circumstances that seemed designed to look accidental, but that the cumulative evidence suggested were not accidental. He had been seen leaving specific locations where multiple disciples had afterward reported unusual sensations in their cultivation pathways, sometimes positive, sometimes unsettling. The emerging picture was not flattering. By the end of the second day, the working theory in the outer sect was that Gu Xiaoyang had developed some kind of unorthodox technique that required him to press himself against other people, and that he did this compulsively and without shame, and that anyone who found themselves near him should be on guard. This theory was not correct in its characterization, but was accurate in its core observation. He was absolutely doing something to people when he touched them. The Shixiong Zhonghao, whose cultivation had experienced 2 unexplained tremors in the past 24 hours, had mentioned to several people that Gu Xiaoyang had been acting strangely. This was helpful for the theory's spread. Gu Xiaoyang did not help himself by running. He had been making his way through the crowd of outer disciples in the training ground, collecting orbs at his usual rate. When critical mass was achieved, and one disciple said out loud, "Why are we running from a single sixth-stage Kwai condensation disciple?" This was a reasonable question. It produced the reasonable answer. 37 people stopped running and turned around. Gu Xiaoyang stopped running and looked at them. He made a rapid calculation. 37 people, each with multiple orbs positioned in a loose semicircle. He thought, this is either very bad or a significant opportunity. The lead disciple stepped forward and said, "We're going to make you regret bothering us." Gu Xiaoyang said, "You're sure you want to do this?" He said it with a question mark at the end, but no particular tone of concern, which the assembled disciples took as bluster from someone overestimating their own capability. They moved forward. He moved toward them. And in the 20 seconds of contact that followed, his absorption efficiency was extraordinary, because the concentration of orbs in a crowd actively moving toward him was dramatically higher than the concentration available when people were simply standing around. He absorbed 15 orbs in the first pass. He took a hit to the ribs and absorbed 3 more during it. He caught a strong attribute orb that made his next punch land hard enough to send the person delivering it backward. He collected a speed-type orb mid-dodge, and his next evasion was faster than he'd expected. By the time the group scattered, having discovered that this single sixth-stage disciple was considerably harder to hurt than they'd anticipated, Gu Xiaoyang's cultivation had advanced again. He stood in the aftermath and felt the new level settle into him and thought, group confrontations are genuinely very efficient. He immediately felt guilty about this thought. Then he picked up his bag and went to look for more orbs. Elder Xia found him outside the inner sect boundary, sitting on a rock eating dried fruit and looking serene. She sat across from him. She said, "I've been watching you for the past 2 days." He said, "I assumed." She said, "You have an attribute absorption ability." He said, that seems to be what's happening. Yes. She said, you can perceive attribute energies that other people can't see. He said, since yesterday morning. She said, and you've been collecting them. He said, yes. She said, systematically. He said, when possible. She sat with this for a moment. Then she said, you absorbed a root quality Wan Qi orb from me yesterday. He said, by accident. She said, in what sense? He said, I didn't deliberately target you specifically. She said, you just happened to absorb my root Qi orb. He said, you walked very close. She looked at him. He looked back at her with the expression of someone who has decided to maintain a position that is not entirely defensible. She said, you're at the 7th stage now, he said. Recently. She said, you were at the 5th stage 3 days ago. He said, I cultivated very... She said, stop saying that. He stopped. She said, the Jianyi technique. You absorbed a Jianyi technique orb from someone in the outer sect. He said, the wood attribute person, yes. She said, that's why your sword chi appeared yesterday in the fight. He said, I figured something out, yes. She said, a Jianyi technique orb shouldn't have transmitted the technique. That type of orb gives insight, not the technique itself. He said it seemed to transmit both. She looked at him with an expression he was beginning to recognize as the one she wore when she was recalibrating her understanding of what was possible. She said, how? He said, I don't know. She said, neither do I. She stood up. She said, come to the inner sect. She said, I'm not going to tell you that you can stay or that you can't. She said, I need time to think about what you are. He said, I would also like time to think about what I am. She almost smiled. She left. He ate more dried fruit and thought about his situation, which was, he had a unique ability he didn't understand, had accidentally developed sword ki that he also didn't understand, had achieved 3 cultivation breakthroughs in 2 days through methods that no one would teach at a reputable institution, and was currently being evaluated by an elder who could probably unmake him with a thought, if she decided he was more problem than asset. He ate the last of the dried fruit. He thought, this could all still go very badly. Then he went to find more orbs. The invitation to the inner sect came with conditions. Elder Xia Qingchu was direct about them. He would study under her. He would not use his absorption ability on inner sect disciples without her knowledge. He would not mention the method by which he had developed sword chi to anyone, and he would stop running through the outer sect making people feel strange. He agreed to all of these conditions. He violated the third one almost immediately, not through malice, but because Lin Zhanglao, the inner sect's senior alchemy elder, was standing in the corridor when Xiao Yang entered, and the expression on the elder's face when he saw Xiao Yang, a kind of bright, excited recognition, produced questions that Xiao Yang answered honestly before remembering he had agreed not to. Lin Zhanglao, learning that a first-level disciple had absorbed a sword technique orb and manifested sword chi without any formal training, said, "You genius." He said it with feeling. Elder Xia, arriving in time to hear this, said, "Please don't call him that." Lin Zhanglao said, "He walked in off the street and did what took me 40 years. He said, that's a genius." Xiao Yang, standing between these two elders, said nothing, and looked at the wall and thought about how to disappear through it. He could not disappear through it. He was taken into the inner sect's cultivation hall and asked to demonstrate his sword chi, which he did, and the senior cultivation master who was brought in to assess the quality of the chi said, "This is 7th stage sword chi." He said, "How long has he been training?" They told him. He said, "No." He said, "That's not possible." They told him about the orbs. He said, "The what?" They told him about the orbs again. He said very slowly, "You mean he absorbed the attribute insights of other cultivators by touching their energy fields?" They said, "Yes," he said, "and the insights synthesized into actual technique." They said, "Apparently." He said, "Without him studying the theoretical foundation." They said, "Without him studying anything." The cultivation master sat down and looked at Xiao Yang and said, "Are you aware that what you're describing has no precedent in recorded cultivation history?" Xiao Yang said, "I'm starting to suspect that, yes." The Chilean mountains lay 5 days' walk from the sect boundary. Xiao Yang had decided to go there for practical reasons. The mountains were known to be populated by spirit beasts of various levels, all of them with attribute orbs, and all of them unaware of the specific vulnerability that their orbs represented in proximity to him. He also needed to leave for reasons that had nothing to do with cultivation, and everything to do with the ongoing development of his reputation inside the sect, which had now reached the point where multiple inner sect disciples had quietly changed their routes to avoid encountering him. This was not entirely unfair, he acknowledged. He had absorbed some of their orbs. He had done it carefully, and the amounts had been small, and he had not targeted anyone who would suffer from the loss. But the sensation people experienced when he brushed past them was real, and people who experienced that sensation and then found their cultivation feeling subtly different tended to connect the two events. He had been asked, by 3 separate people, whether he had special techniques that he was practicing on other disciples. He had said no to all 3 of them. 2 of them had believed him. The third had looked at him with the specific expression of someone who has made a decision to keep their distance and walked away without further discussion. He found the first spirit beast 3 hours into the mountains. It was a mid-level wolf variant, larger than the natural version, with the faint luminescence that indicated significant accumulated spiritual energy. Its orbs floated in a cluster around its flanks. 2 strength-type orbs, 1 instinct-type orb that he had not encountered before, and a smaller one that pulsed with the specific rhythm he had learned to associate with combat reflexes. He observed it from a distance and thought, the problem is getting close enough. The beast could smell him. He had been careful about his approach, but the wind had shifted and the wolf had found him with its nose before he found it with strategy. It charged. This was, Xiao Yang reflected as he jumped sideways, the part of his plan that he had not entirely worked out. His cultivation was genuine, but his combat experience was minimal, and absorbing the attribute orbs that gave other people combat ability was not the same as having trained that ability into his body's reflexes over years of practice. He had the insights. He did not have the muscle memory. The wolf lunged. He moved. Not as cleanly as he would have liked, but with the instinctive efficiency of someone whose body had been absorbing combat-related attributes for 3 days and was beginning, at a cellular level, to know things that his conscious mind had not yet been taught. He landed awkwardly but on his feet. The wolf circled. He thought, it's hesitating. He understood why a moment later, the wolf had expected him to fall, and the fact that he had not fell outside its estimated behavior pattern, and animals operating on instinct take a moment to recalibrate when expectations fail. He used that moment. He moved toward the wolf instead of away from it, which was either brilliant or suicidal, depending on whether his body's accumulated combat knowledge was sufficient to support what he was attempting. It was sufficient. His hand found the instinct-type orb as he passed the wolf's flank, and the orb dissolved into him with the specific warmth of predator cognition integrating into human sensory processing, and the next dodge was not a decision. It was a reflex. The wolf's second charge was handled. The third attack, Xiao Yang threw back with everything the strength-type orbs had given him, and the wolf hit the ground and stayed there. He stood over it, breathing hard, and thought, I need to practice this significantly more before I try the larger ones. Then, he absorbed the remaining orbs, felt his cultivation jump again, and kept walking. The Chilean mountains deepened. The spirit beasts became more interesting. He learned over the following days that different types of beasts offered different types of insight. The wolf variants gave him predator awareness and burst speed. The earth-type boar variants gave him stability and ground sensing. The bird-type creatures gave him spatial awareness and height-angle combat understanding. Each absorption was a small education delivered not as knowledge but as capability, embedded into his body's automatic responses before his conscious mind had fully processed the lesson. He was becoming, in the specific way that montages compress time, better at things he had not practiced. He was also becoming significantly stronger in ways that bore no straightforward relationship to his cultivation stage, which was now at the 8th level and pushing toward the 9th. His body had absorbed enough vitality and strength orbs that his physical capability significantly exceeded what a ninth-stage Qi condensation cultivator would normally possess. He hit things harder than he should be able to. He recovered faster than was typical. He moved with the combined efficiency of a dozen different predators' instinct patterns synthesized into something that was uniquely his own because no one else had ever assembled this specific combination. He developed a sword technique by absorbing sword-related orbs from birds in flight and extrapolating the three-dimensional movement patterns into ground-level combat application. He named it the swallow return technique because the motion felt like a bird banking. He did not tell anyone he had named it. It felt presumptuous for a barely ninth-stage disciple to be naming sword techniques. The encounter with the woman in black happened on the 5th day, in a mountain hollow that he had been using as a campsite. He was eating dried meat and reviewing what he had absorbed in the past 24 hours when the sound of fighting cut through the trees. Not the heavy, significant sounds of major cultivators clashing, but the swift, economical sounds of someone dispatching opponents in close succession without wasted effort. He moved toward the sound carefully, which was both his nature and his current strategic preference. Through the tree line he saw a woman, roughly his age in appearance though her cultivation read significantly older, dismantling a group of black-robed attackers with the calm efficiency of someone performing a task they are very good at. She did not look endangered. She also did not look like she was enjoying herself. She looked like someone processing an interruption to their day. The last attacker fell. She stood in the aftermath and looked down at the scattered bodies with an expression that Xiao Yang, watching from the trees, read as, "This keeps happening, and I'm tired of it." He recognized the expression. He had worn it recently. He saw the orbs clustered around her. They were unlike anything he had seen from the outer Sect disciples or the spirit beasts. Deeper, denser, more complex. He thought, this woman is in the entry stage of the nascent soul realm. He thought, this woman is significantly older than she looks. He thought, her orbs would advance me multiple stages if I could absorb them. He thought, I absolutely should not try to absorb her orbs. Then, the second group of black-robed attackers emerged from the trees on the other side of the hollow and surrounded her. And with them came a white-robed man of considerable cultivation and considerable self-regard, and the situation became considerably more complicated. The white-robed man introduced himself as Ryu Shen, one of the 12 wandering deities of the Sky Alliance. He addressed the woman with the specific condescension of someone who has power and is aware of it and comfortable with it. He told her that resistance was unnecessary. He told her that the Sky Alliance had arrangements that she would benefit from accepting. The woman, whose name Xiao Yang would learn later, was Qin Yuan, and whose status was considerably above what the white-robed man was treating it as, looked at Ryu Shen with an expression that contained no fear whatsoever and said, "Send your general." She said, "A minor wandering deity doesn't merit my full effort." Ryu Shen's expression did something complex. The fighting started. Xiao Yang, still in the trees, found himself in the interesting position of watching a battle between forces both of whom could probably end him without taking their attention fully off each other, while systematically absorbing the stray orbs that combat inevitably displaced into the surrounding area. He was careful about it. He absorbed from the fallen black-robed attackers who no longer needed what he was taking. He absorbed ambient attribute energy that had been loosened by the clash of high-level techniques. He absorbed a kill-type orb that had drifted loose from Qin Yuan's combat field and immediately understood why it existed. The orb's energy moved through him like cold water, clarity and danger and the specific understanding that sometimes the only path forward involves an ending. He sat with that understanding for a moment. He put it in the place where the other dark things went, and continued absorbing the lighter materials. Ryu Shen was losing the exchange. He was technically more accomplished in terms of formal cultivation technique, but Qin Yuan's combat philosophy was simpler and harder. She did not perform, she resolved, and the gap between performing and resolving a battle was visible in every exchange. Ryu Shen called reinforcements. More black-robed cultivators poured from the tree line. Xiao Yang, calculating rapidly, decided that the math of this situation required action. He had absorbed enough from the surrounding battle to make his current capabilities significantly beyond his nominal cultivation stage. He had the swallow return technique ready. He had the orbs from 3 days of mountain combat settlement integrated into his reflexes. He stepped out of the trees. He made direct eye contact with Qin Yuan across the chaos of the battle. He made a decision. He moved. The next 4 minutes were, by any objective measure, the most dangerous 4 minutes of Xiao Yang's life up to that point. He found Ryu Shen at the edge of a formation of black-robed cultivators and went for the orbs, specifically the technique-type orb that was, in his estimation, the source of the man's primary capability. Getting it required getting close enough to touch Ryu Shen, which required getting through the cultivators around him, which required using everything he had learned in the mountains in combination rather than in sequence. He moved like the swallow return technique had been designed from birth to move, between things, through openings, using the moment after one force committed as the entry point for the next approach. He absorbed a strength orb from a black-robed attacker mid-dodge and felt the boost arrive in real time. He absorbed an earth stability orb from another mid-run and felt his footing improve. He reached Ryu Shen in a state of comprehensive attribute enrichment, absorbed the technique-type orb in a glancing contact, and got hit very hard for the trouble. He flew sideways. He landed badly. He got up. The orb was worth it. He could feel the technique insight integrating, not as something he could deploy yet, but as a framework that would inform everything he did from this point forward. He got back into the fight. He helped Qin Yuan find an opening that she used with the efficiency of someone who has not survived this long by wasting opportunities. Ryu Shen, destabilized, retreated to reassemble his forces. Qin Yuan looked at Xiao Yang. He looked back at her. There was a brief silence. She said, "You absorbed one of his technique orbs." He said, "I absorbed some things, yes." She said, "While fighting." He said, "Multitasking, yes." She looked at him the way Elder Xia had looked at him, with the expression of someone recalibrating their understanding of what was possible. She said, "Who are you?" He said, Xiao Yang, outer sect disciple of Qingyun sect." She said, "Qingyun sect." He said, "I know, it's modest sounding." She said, "That's not what I was thinking." He said, "What were you thinking?" She said, "I was thinking about how a qi condensation disciple arrived at the Qilian Mountains alone and apparently absorbs combat attributes during active fights." He said, "It's a developing skill." She said, "I imagine." They ran from Ryu Shen's regrouped forces together because the practical math of the moment required it, and running together was the option that kept both of them alive. Qin Yuan moved with a precision that made it clear she had been running from people for some time, and had developed an efficient approach to it. Xiao Yang kept up using a combination of legitimate cultivation progress and the speed orbs he had been absorbing for days. They ran until the sounds of pursuit became distant, then faint, then absent. They stopped beside a stream. Qin Yuan said, "Your sword technique, the one you used in the second pass." He said, "The swallow return technique." She said, "You developed that yourself." He said, "Sort of." He said, "I absorbed bird-type flight orbs and extrapolated." She said, "From bird orbs." He said, "The movement pattern transfers." She sat with this. She said, "The Sky Alliance will come back." She said, "They always do." He said, "Why are they after you?" She did not answer immediately. When she did, she gave him a version of the answer that was accurate but incomplete. She was the target of organized pursuit. She had been for some time. The reasons were old and complicated and not something she was going to summarize by a mountain stream. He accepted this. He said, "Do you need to go somewhere?" She said, "I need to reach a specific location." She said, "There are people there who can provide temporary safety." He said, "I can go with you as far as it's in the same direction as Qingyun sect." She looked at him. He looked back at her. She said, "Why?" He said, "Because the alternative is you going alone and the pursuit resuming within a day." He said, "I'm not saying I can stop them." He said, "I'm saying my presence complicates their calculus slightly, which gives you marginally more time." She said, "You're calculating how useful you are as a diversionary asset." He said, "That's one way to describe it." She said, "You're very blunt." He said, "I find it saves time." She almost smiled. She said, "The location I need is 2 days north." He said, "I'll walk with you." She said, "All right." They walked. 2 days later, which included 3 minor altercations with Sky Alliance scouts, one significant fight with a cultivator who reported to Ryu Shen, and who Gu Xiaoyang managed to survive through the specific grace of having absorbed a paralytic-type orb from a venomous spirit beast earlier in the week that he deployed at the exact right moment, and one campfire conversation that lasted until well past midnight and covered topics ranging from Qin Yuan's obvious reluctance to discuss her actual situation to Gu Xiaoyang's fairly frank account of how he had ended up in the Qilian Mountains alone. They arrived at the edge of a cultivated valley. Guards materialized from the trees and from the air, and from positions that suggested someone had been told they were coming. Qin Wen said something to the guards that Gu Xiaoyang was not close enough to hear. The guards looked at him. He waved. They did not wave back. They were escorted inward. Someone official and important-looking came forward and bowed to Qin Yuan with the specific depth of deference that indicated she was significantly more than she had presented herself as. Gu Xiaoyang looked at this. He looked at the scale of the establishment they had entered. He looked at the guard's insignia. He thought, "She's the princess." He thought, "She is the actual Duan Yuan princess," which is a title that even the Qingyun sect's history texts mention in the category of figures whose politics are above our pay grade. He thought, "I have been walking with the Duan Yuan princess for 2 days and did not know it." He thought, "She did not tell me," which means either she trusts me not to make it a thing or she specifically did not want it to be a thing. He decided to make it not a thing. He said nothing about it. She noticed that he had noticed and said nothing. Both of them said nothing, and this was, Gu Xiaoyang felt, the correct response to the situation. The farewell at the valley's edge was brief. Qin Yuan said, "You saved my life twice and got hit very hard 3 times. He said, "You saved my life once and did not get hit at all, so the exchange is unfair." She said, "I will remember the name Gu Xiaoyang." He said, "I will remember not to pursue further inquiries into the name of the person I walked with for 2 days. She said, "That's very diplomatic." He said, "I try." She said, "Your absorption ability." He said, "Yes?" She said, "Be careful." She said, "There are people who would treat you as a resource if they knew about it." He said, "I know." He said, "I have been careful." She said, "Be more careful." She looked at him with an expression that was difficult to characterize. There was something in it that he read as concern, and something that might have been respect, and something else that he did not fully understand. Then she said, "The cultivator you paralyzed yesterday." He said, "Yes?" She said, "The toxin you used." He said, "Absorbed from a mountain snake near the 3rd peak." She said, "Do you know what snake that was?" He said, "A large one?" She said, "That was a king cobra of the spirit variety. Its venom is fatal to cultivators at your level." He said, "I didn't absorb the full venom." She said, "You absorbed enough to kill you." He said, "Well." He thought about this. He said, "I feel fine." She said, "You feel fine because whatever absorption ability you have also metabolized it." He said, "I didn't know I could do that." She said, "Apparently neither did you." She turned and walked back into the valley. He turned and walked back toward Qingyun Sect. He thought about the king cobra venom. He thought about the fact that he had absorbed something potentially lethal, and his body had simply decided to process it. He thought, "My ability is more comprehensive than I understood." He thought, "I need to be much more careful about what I absorb in the future." He thought, "I also need to get home before Elder Xia sends someone to find me." He walked faster. He arrived back at Qingyun Sect on the 9th day after leaving, which was the 7th day after Elder Xia had begun inquiring about his whereabouts, and the 3rd day after senior brother Zhang Hao had been told to keep an eye out for him, and had failed at this task. He walked through the outer gate and up to the inner hall, and arrived to find Elder Xia and Elder Lin Zhang Lao both waiting with the specific energy of people who have been waiting long enough to have fully worked through several different versions of this conversation. He said, "I'm back." Elder Xia said, "Clearly." Elder Lin Zhonglao said, "You've been in the Chilean mountains." He said, "How did you know?" Lin Zhonglao said, "You smell like mountain wolf and spirit boar and something else I can't identify." He said, "There may have been some snake involvement." Lin Zhonglao said, "Your cultivation." He said, "Ninth stage." Lin Zhonglao said, "When you left you were 7th stage." He said, "It was a productive trip." Lin Zhonglao made the sound of a man who was very pleased with an outcome he had not predicted. He said, "In 9 days you advanced 2 stages." He said, "This child is extraordinary." Elder Xia said, "Stop saying that." Lin Zhonglao said, "It keeps being true." Elder Xia looked at Xiao Yang. She said, "What happened in the mountains?" He said, "I cultivated." She said, "Stop saying that." He told them an edited version of the truth that omitted specific identifying details about Qin Yuan and included an accurate account of the spirit-beast encounters, the absorption developments, and the combat experience. Lin Zhonglao listened with the absorbed attention of a man who had spent his life studying exceptional talents and was encountering something genuinely new. Elder Xia listened with the focused attention of someone cataloging risk factors. At the end she said, "You have the basis for sword qi from absorbed technique insights." He said, "Yes." She said, "Your body metabolized spirit beast venom." He said, "Apparently." She said, "You absorbed an attribute cluster from a nascent soul-level cultivator and survived." He said, "She was very kind about it." Elder Xia said, "The absorption should have at minimum rendered you unconscious." He said, "It was a small cluster." She said, "It should not have been possible at your cultivation stage." He said, "I've noticed that phrase appears often in discussions about me." Lin Zhonglao laughed. Elder Xia did not. She said, "You are going to study alchemy with Elder Lin and sword technique with me." She said, "You are going to do these things properly, with instruction and structure, so that your abilities develop on a foundation that won't kill you." He said, "I appreciate that." She said, "You will not leave the sect grounds without informing me." He said, "Understood." She said, "And you will stop telling people you cultivated very hard." He said, "I will say something more accurate." She said, "Thank you." She left. Lin Zhonglao said, "She's very pleased with you, you know." Xiao Yang said, "She doesn't show it." Lin Zhonglao said, "She showed it by not expelling you 3 separate times when the rules said she should." He said, "That's a subtle demonstration." Lin Zhonglao said, "She's a subtle person." He sat across from Xiao Yang and said, "Now, tell me about the venom metabolism. Tell me about everything the absorption did and felt like. Tell me from the beginning and don't leave things out." Xiao Yang told him. They talked for 2 hours. When they were finished, Lin Zhonglao said, "In 40 years, I have never encountered anything like what you're describing." Xiao Yang said, "I'm told that often." Lin Zhonglao said, "Good." He said, "Unusual abilities, properly developed, become extraordinary ones." He said, "What you have right now is raw and accidental and extremely useful." He said, "What we're going to turn it into is deliberate and comprehensive and frightening in the best way." He said, "Welcome to my class." Xiao Yang looked at the elder who had called him a genius twice and decided, for the first time since walking out of his dormitory with a slap mark on his face and orbs in his vision, that something might genuinely be going right. The half-year grand examination arrived with the inevitability of all scheduled events. It was the examination that determined which outer disciples would advance to the inner sect, and it was the examination that Xiao Yang had been preparing for, in his particular way, since the moment he had been told it existed. He had spent 3 weeks in Lin Zhonglao's alchemy workshop, developing an understanding of medicinal compounds that was, as the elder described it, intuitive in ways that could not be taught because they came from his direct perception of attribute energies in the materials, rather than from textbook knowledge. He had spent 3 weeks training under Elder Xia, who drilled him in sword technique foundations with the patient intensity of someone who was compensating for years of missed fundamentals. and who occasionally looked at the results of his practice with an expression he was learning to read as surprise held very carefully in check. He had spent every available free hour in the outer training ground, absorbing what was available, developing the integration of what he had absorbed into consistent capability, rather than sporadic excellence. The examination format was announced. First, the Maze of Illusions, a formation array populated with mechanical construct opponents enhanced with elemental energy, designed to test practical combat capability. Pass rate determined by time. Second, one-on-one combat elimination rounds. Top 10 received special cultivation resources, top 3 received high-grade manuals, first place received a personal instruction session with a peak cultivator elder. Xiao Yang read the announcement and thought, the maze constructs will have attribute orbs. He thought, mechanical constructs enhanced with elemental energy will be running on concentrated attribute energy. He thought, I can absorb directly from the energy source of each construct as I pass it. He thought, this examination is tailored for exactly what I do. He did not say this out loud because it seemed immodest. He said it internally and felt a significant amount of anticipatory energy about the upcoming morning. The maze was designed to take a competent 6-stage disciple approximately 20 minutes. The fastest time recorded in the past 5 examinations was 11 minutes, by a prodigious disciple who had since advanced to inner sect elder status. Xiao Yang walked into the maze. He looked at the first construct and saw its attribute matrix, a concentrated elemental energy core radiating 5 distinct attribute streams, each powering a different aspect of the construct's combat function. He thought, I can absorb the energy core, and the construct will stop functioning. He thought, this is either extremely efficient or against the rules. He reviewed what he remembered of the examination rules. The rules said, disable or evade the constructs using any methods available. They did not specify that the constructs were expected to remain intact. He reached for the first construct's energy core. He absorbed it. The construct stopped. He moved to the second construct. He absorbed its core. He moved to the third. The examination official monitoring from the observation platform noticed that the mechanical opponents were stopping without being struck. He leaned forward. He watched for another 30 seconds. He sent a message to Elder Xia. Elder Xia arrived at the observation platform and watched Xiao Yang systematically absorb the energy matrices of every construct in the maze. The examination official said, he's disassembling them. Elder Xia said, yes. He said, the constructs should take weeks to rebuild. She said, yes. He said, they won't be usable for the rest of the examination. She said, yes. He said, he finished the maze in 2 minutes and 40 seconds. She said, yes. He said, that's... He did not have the appropriate adjective. She said, yes. The combat rounds were more straightforward. He drew opponents from the middle ranks of the examination's participants, cultivators who were good and who had been working hard and who had every right to expect that their preparation would see them through, against a disciple whose recent cultivation advancement was known, but whose combat capability was still being underestimated by people who had not seen what he had developed in the mountains and the past 3 weeks. He dispatched his first opponent in 1 exchange. His second opponent lasted 2 exchanges. His third opponent lasted 3 exchanges, which was progress in the wrong direction, but his third opponent was significantly better than his second, and 3 exchanges was enough to win. He entered the finals against a disciple named Tang Li, who had reached 9th stage months earlier and was widely considered the front runner. Tang Li looked at him with the expression of someone who is not afraid but is being appropriately cautious. Tang Li said, I know what you can do. He said, then you're ahead of most people. Tang Li said, I know about the attributes. He said, interesting. Tang Li said, I've been watching your fights. He said, I appreciate that. Tang Li said, my strategy is to never let you touch me. He said, that's a reasonable strategy. Tang Li said, I'm going to win by keeping distance and outlasting you. He said, you're welcome to try. He said this without particular aggression because he was genuinely curious how the fight would go. Tang Li was good enough that the outcome was not predetermined, and the only combat Gu Xiaoyang had found genuinely educational in recent weeks were the ones he wasn't certain he would win. Tang Li's strategy was executed well. He maintained distance, he used his cultivation advantage at the higher ranges, and he did not allow Gu Xiaoyang to close in the ways that would enable physical contact. But sword qi, Gu Xiaoyang had learned from Elder Xia, was not the same as physical contact. And in the exchange of sword qi at distance, the quality of insight mattered as much as the quantity of cultivation. Tang Li's sword qi was excellent, cleanly formed, well-directed, trained through years of proper practice. Gu Xiaoyang's sword qi was built from absorbed insights synthesized from dozens of sources, and what it lacked in formal elegance it compensated for in something that Elder Xia had, after watching him practice for 3 weeks, described as unpredictability that comes from not having learned the standard patterns. He did not fight the way people expected because he had not been taught how they expected people to fight. His sword qi moved in lines that did not match the classic angles. His footwork had bird patterns and predator patterns and mountain-specific patterns from creatures that Tang Li had never fought or studied. Tang Li adapted well. He adapted repeatedly. In the end, he adapted once too slowly and took a sword qi strike to the shoulder that knocked him off the platform. He stood up. He bowed. He said, "That was well fought." Gu Xiaoyang said, "You made me work for it." That was also true. He stood in first place at the examination. Elder Xia announced this with the tone of someone stating a fact that she had anticipated and that she wanted processed without excess celebration. Lin Zhanglao, standing behind her, was visibly delighted and did not try to hide it. The other disciples received their rewards with appropriate satisfaction, and then someone in the watching crowd, a disciple from the inner sect who had no business at the outer examination except to observe, said something loud enough to carry. He said the name. He said, "Hua Shu Rong." He said it with the tone of someone delivering information they expected to be damaging. Hua Shu Rong. The inner sect disciple who had been chasing Gu Xiaoyang for days on Elder Xia's behalf before the mountain trip, who had been humiliated in the outer examination's preliminary rounds by Gu Xiaoyang's performance, who had allied himself with the inner sect faction that had reasons of its own to want Gu Xiaoyang either controllable or removed. The name landing in the crowd changed the atmosphere with the specific efficiency of names that carry institutional weight. Lin Zhanglao's expression shifted. Elder Xia's expression went flat in the particular way that meant she was deciding something. Gu Xiaoyang, standing on the examination platform with his name at the top of the list, felt the atmosphere change and thought, something more is coming. He was right. Something more was coming. He stood on the platform and looked out at the assembled disciples and thought about the past 3 weeks. The mountains, the constructs, the fights, the orbs, the absorption, the sword qi, the unexpected path that had led from a morning slap to a first-place ranking in the outer sect examination, and thought, I have been surviving complications one at a time. He thought, the complications are going to get larger. He thought, the things I have are genuinely useful, but useful things attract the wrong kind of attention as consistently as they attract the right kind. He thought, Elder Xia knows this. He thought, Lin Zhanglao knows this. He thought, the person who just said that name knows it too, and that is why they said it. The examination ground was clearing. The senior disciples and elders were dispersing. The disciples who had placed well were moving toward their new opportunities. And Gu Xiaoyang stood at the edge of the platform and looked out at the mountains visible on the horizon beyond the sect grounds, where the Qilian peaks caught the late afternoon light, and thought about the nascent soul cultivator who had walked 2 days with him and had said, be more careful. He thought, I've been more careful than I was. He thought, I need to keep getting more careful. He thought, the things that are coming will require me to be significantly more capable than I currently am, and the path to that capability is the one I've already started down, and it is not a standard path, and the people who notice me walking it are not all going to respond the way Lin Zhanglao did. He thought about the platform, and the crowd, and the examination results, and the name that had been said out loud with deliberate intent. He thought, tomorrow is going to be interesting. He stepped off the platform. He went to find his lodgings. The mountains held their light for another few minutes. Then the sun moved and they went dark, and the sect's lanterns came on one by one, and Xiao Yang walked through the lit corridors of his new home and thought about what it meant to have abilities that no one else had, in a world that had very specific ideas about what abilities were for. He thought, it means the people who want to use you will be creative. He thought, it means the people who want to stop you will be organized. He thought, it means I need to be smarter than both of them before either of them finds an advantage. He thought, I absorbed enough orbs to feel something like confidence about that. He thought, not complacency, just confidence. He went to sleep. The examination results were posted. His name was at the top. In a different building, a conversation was happening that included his name in a context he would not have found flattering. In yet another building, Lin Zhang Lao was writing something in his notebook with the focused energy of a man who has found a genuinely new phenomenon and wants to document it before he loses the details. Elder Xia was not writing anything down, she was thinking, and Xiao Yang was asleep, because the day had been long and the examination had been taxing and tomorrow was going to be complicated, and sleep, at least, was something he could still have without absorbing it from someone else. The morning after the examination brought two things: a summons to Elder Xia's inner hall, and information from Zhang Hao delivered at breakfast speed and volume that suggested Zhang Hao had been awake for some time processing what he had witnessed. Zhang Hao sat across from Xiao Yang at the communal table and said, "You absorbed the maze constructs." Xiao Yang said, "I disabled them, yes." Zhang Hao said, "I watched." He said, "You touched the constructs and they stopped." Xiao Yang said, "The examination rules said disable or evade." Zhang Hao said, "I know what the rules said." He said, "I know what absorb means." Xiao Yang ate his breakfast and did not say anything. Zhang Hao said, "The night I came to your room and you did the thing." He said, "I remember." Zhang Hao said, "You touched one of mine." Xiao Yang set down his chopsticks. He said, "A small one." He said, "It was before I understood what I was doing." He said, "I'm sorry." Zhang Hao said, "I'm not angry." He said, "My cultivation loosened after that." He said, "I broke through the barrier that had been blocking me for 8 months." Xiao Yang looked at him. Zhang Hao said, "I thought you should know." Xiao Yang said, "I didn't plan that." Zhang Hao said, "I know." He said, "But it happened." He said, "Whatever you do when you touch those orbs, it's not always taking something. Sometimes it seems to be releasing something that was stuck." He said this with the considered delivery of someone who has thought about it carefully and wants it received accurately. Xiao Yang sat with this. He said, "I hadn't considered that." Zhang Hao said, "I thought you should." He picked up his bowl and resumed eating. Xiao Yang looked at his own bowl and thought about 8 months of blocked cultivation dissolving because of an accidental contact in a confused moment at dawn, and thought about all the other people he had brushed past in the training grounds and thought, "I need to pay more attention to what happens after I move through a crowd." He thought, "The outcomes are not all what I've been assuming they are." Elder Xia's inner hall was quiet in the specific way of spaces that have been used for long and focused work, the quietness of accumulated thought. She was at her table when he arrived, and she did not look up immediately. He stood inside the door and waited. She said, "Sit." He sat. She said, "The examination was notable." He said, "I'm told first place usually is." She said, "Don't be glib." He said, "Understood." She said, "Lin Zhang Lao has been petitioning me about your alchemy training since before you were even formally accepted into the inner sect." He said he mentioned he wanted to formalize the arrangement. She said he wants to bring you before the inner sect council as a special case. He said that sounds like it has implications. She said, "It has significant implications." She set down what she had been reading. She looked at him with the direct attention she reserved for conversations that were going to be about something real. She said, "The inner sect has factions." He said, "I'd assumed." She said, "One of those factions would prefer that your abilities were under their oversight rather than mine." He said, "Hua Shu Rong." She said, "Hua Shu Rong is the visible part of that faction." He said, "And the less visible part?" She said, The less visible part is patient and organized, and has been watching you since the mountain incident. He said, which incident specifically? She said, you absorbed a wandering deity's technique orb. He said, I didn't know that was notable at the time. She said, it's observable. She said, someone with the right perception watching the Kilian Mountains at the right time would have felt the technique orb destabilize. He said, and someone was watching. She said, the Sky Alliance has watchers in many ranges. He was quiet for a moment. He said, so they know what I did. She said, they know something unusual happened. He said, they don't know what specifically. She said, not yet. She said, they're curious. He said, that's not good. She said, no. She said, curiosity from the Sky Alliance about something unusual in a Sect's junior ranks is the beginning of a specific kind of problem. He said, the kind that leads to people arriving asking questions with methods that are not polite. She said, precisely. She looked at him steadily. She said, I'm telling you this because I believe you should understand the full landscape of your situation. He said, I appreciate that. He said, what's the recommended course of action? She said, develop faster than they can organize. She said, your advancement in the past month suggests this is achievable. He said, and in the meantime, she said, be excellent at everything in front of you and be careful about everything behind you. He said, that seems like a reasonable summary. She said, it's the only summary I have. She said, Lin Zhanglao's formalization request goes before the Inner Sect Council in 3 days. He said, and if they approve it, she said, you become a formally recognized special case, which limits what any faction can do to you without institutional justification. He said, and if they don't approve it, she said, then we rely on the alternative approach. He said, which is? She said, making you so useful and so advanced so quickly that removing you becomes a worse option than keeping you. He said, I see. He said, so the examination performance was part of that strategy. She said, it was a data point in a broader argument. He said, I contributed to a strategy I didn't know about. She said, you performed exactly as you're capable of performing. The strategy was my concern. He sat with this for a moment. He said, I would prefer to be informed about strategies that involve me. She looked at him. She said, that's fair. She said, I'll keep that in mind. He said, thank you. He stood up. He turned to go. She said, one more thing. He stopped. She said, the person you walked with in the Kilian Mountains. He said nothing. She said, I'm not asking who it was. He said, all right. She said, I'm telling you that whoever it was is looking for you. He said, I don't understand. She said, a message came to the sect, indirect, through 3 separate channels. The message contained your name. It said, when the time comes, he knows where to go. He stood in the doorway and thought about that. He said, I don't know what that means. She said, I believe that's the point. She said, whoever sent it knows that you'll understand it when the time comes. He said, that's very cryptic. She said, most things involving entities at that level are. He said, at that level. She said, a message routed through 3 channels simultaneously to arrive at a specific sect for a specific disciple comes from someone with considerable resources. He said, or considerable care. She said, yes, or considerable care. She went back to her reading. He went back to thinking about a mountain stream and a 2-day walk and the expression of someone who had said, be more careful. He thought, she sent a message. He thought, she knows where I am. He thought, I don't know what time she means or where she expects me to go, but she apparently believes I will. He went to find Lin Zhanglao and learn about alchemy. He had a lot of things to learn and apparently not much time before the landscape around him became complicated in ways that required him to already be excellent. The alchemy workshop was the organized chaos of a serious scholar who has been collecting materials and notes for decades, and who has developed their own filing system that makes perfect sense to them, and minimal sense to everyone else. Lin Zhanglao conducted his teaching the way he conducted everything, with the specific enthusiasm of someone doing exactly what they most wanted to be doing. He had Gu Xiaoyang describe his perception of attribute energies in medicinal materials with such thoroughness that Gu Xiaoyang had to explain the same concept in 4 different ways before the elder was satisfied. He had him attempt to replicate the process by which he had synthesized a pill with intuitive temperature management. He watched the results with the focused attention of someone collecting data points. He said, "You perceive the attribute energy of the individual materials, and you use that perception to calibrate the refinement." He said, "You don't follow the standard time-based process." He said, "You follow an energy state process." Gu Xiaoyang said, "Is that what it's called?" Lin Zhonglao said, "I'm naming it now as I describe it." He said, "The standard process is a map." He said, "Your process is navigation by sensing where you are." He said, "The map is reliable for normal conditions. Your approach is more flexible and potentially more precise." He said, "It also requires exactly the perception you have which no one else does, which means I cannot teach it to other students, but I can help you refine it." He said, "Do you understand?" Gu Xiaoyang said, "I understand the practical part." He said, "What's the theoretical significance?" Lin Zhonglao looked at him with the expression of a man who has been waiting for someone to ask that question, and is very pleased that someone finally did. He said, "The theoretical significance is that you are demonstrating empirically that direct energy state perception can produce equivalent or superior results to decades of accumulated process knowledge." He said, "This has implications for how we understand the relationship between talent and technique." He said, "It suggests that the formal path exists to approximate something that direct perception can access natively." He said, "If your perception can be refined and expanded, you might be able to do things with alchemy that the standard approach cannot reach." He said, "Not because you'll be better at the standard approach, but because you're not taking the standard approach at all." He said, "You're doing something different that arrives at similar and sometimes better outcomes by a route that no manual describes." Gu Xiaoyang sat with this. He said, "That's both encouraging and somewhat alarming." Lin Zhonglao said, "Yes, that's the correct response to genuinely unusual ability." He said, "The encouraging part is that you have it. The alarming part is what other people will decide to do about it." The inner sect council meeting happened 3 days later. Gu Xiaoyang was not present for it and received his account of what happened second-hand from Lin Zhonglao, who had been present and who delivered the account with the editorial framing of someone who wants you to understand context without simply giving you the raw events. The council had been divided, as Elder Xia had predicted, between those who wanted Gu Xiaoyang formally recognized and those who wanted him formally supervised, which, Lin Zhonglao explained, was a difference with significant practical implications. Formal recognition meant he operated under his own development trajectory with Elder Xia and Lin Zhonglao as nominal mentors. Formal supervision meant he was assigned to a council working group with defined outcomes and defined oversight, which in practice meant that whatever he produced, insights, techniques, alchemy outputs, would be evaluated for institutional use before he would have full access to them himself. The faction supporting supervision had made the argument that a disciple with unique abilities and rapid advancement posed stability risks that justified oversight. The faction supporting recognition had made the argument that exceptional talent required exceptional autonomy to develop properly, and that attempting to constrain the development of abilities that were not fully understood would produce worse outcomes than allowing them to develop naturally under experienced guidance. Lin Zhonglao had supported recognition. Elder Xia had supported recognition. Several members had been undecided. The deciding factor had been, of all things, the examination results, specifically the manner in which the maze constructs had been disabled, which had been observed by enough people that any interpretation of the events as ordinary was impossible, and which had produced enough conversation that the council had information to evaluate before making the decision. The conclusion was formal recognition, conditional. The condition, monthly reporting from both Elder Xia and Lin Zhonglao, quarterly assessment by the council, and the specific provision that if Gu Xiaoyang's abilities expanded in unexpected directions, the council would be notified before the expansion was acted upon. Lin Zhonglao said, "These are conditions I am comfortable with." Elder Xia, he said, had said nothing in response but had expressed agreement through the lack of objection. Gu Xiaoyang said, "What about the faction that wanted supervision?" Lin Zhonglao said, "They accepted the outcome with the specific acceptance of people who expect to revisit the question later." He said, Hua Shurong and his associates left the meeting without congratulating the decision. Gu Xiaoyang said, "I expect they'll find other methods." Lin Zhonglao said, "Yes." He said, "So will we." He said, "Now the pill refinement experiment from yesterday. Let's talk about what you perceived in the third material when the temperature reached the transition point. The days that followed were full in the specific way of time that is used well and is therefore passing quickly. Morning, sword technique with Elder Xia, who was developing his sword chi from an interesting accident into a deliberate practice. Afternoon, alchemy with Lin Zhanglao, who was mapping his perceptive abilities with the enthusiasm of a cartographer who has discovered an unexpected continent. Evening, absorption runs in the available spaces because the orbs were still there and still useful, and the accumulated effect was still the fastest path to the advancement that the context of his situation required. He was learning to be more precise about what he took and what he left. He was learning to distinguish between the orbs that represented developed capability, someone would notice losing, and the ambient overflow orbs that accumulated around cultivators who were not collecting or using them. Loose energy that floated away from its source and dissolved naturally into the atmosphere if nothing absorbed it first. He took from the overflow. He began to leave the personal attribute clusters alone, unless the situation specifically required otherwise. He developed over the course of 2 weeks a practice that felt less like theft and more like cultivation in a non-standard form. He talked to Lin Zhanglao about it. The elder said, "You're describing what the oldest texts called wild cultivation." He said, "Absorption-based development that uses ambient and overflow energy rather than meditation-based generation." He said, "The text described it as a path that several ancient cultivators had walked, usually by accident, and that produced capabilities the classical paths didn't generate." He said, "It was considered inefficient because most people can't perceive the ambient energies clearly enough to use them." Gu Xiaoyang said, "I can perceive them." Lin Zhanglao said, "Yes." He said, "Which changes the efficiency calculation entirely." He said, "I want you to document everything you perceive about ambient orbs for the next week." He said, "I want to understand the full scope of what's available to you." He said, "We may be looking at a cultivation path that hasn't been seriously explored because the prerequisite perception ability has never appeared in a documented cultivator before." Gu Xiaoyang said, "That's a large claim." Lin Zhanglao said, "I'm a cautious person who has spent 40 years being precise about data, and I'm saying it anyway." He said, "Document everything." 3 weeks after the council meeting, Hua Shurong found Gu Xiaoyang in the training ground. He did not find him by accident. He was accompanied by 2 inner sect disciples of senior standing, and the configuration of the 3 of them, Hua Shurong at the center, the 2 seniors slightly behind and to each side, was the configuration of people who have had a conversation about this beforehand and have agreed on how it will go. Hua Shurong said, "Gu Xiaoyang." He said, "I've been wanting to talk to you." Gu Xiaoyang stopped his sword form and looked at them. He said, "I'm available." Hua Shurong said, "The inner sect has resources." He said, "Particular resources." He said, "There are cultivation manuals in the inner sect's vault that would advance you significantly faster than the path you're currently on." He said, "I have access to those resources." He said, "With the right arrangement, you could also have access." Gu Xiaoyang said, "What kind of arrangement?" Hua Shurong said, "Periodic demonstration." He said, "We have researchers who are interested in what you can do." He said, "If you'd be willing to demonstrate your ability under observation and allow the observations to inform our research, we could offer significant resource support." Gu Xiaoyang said, "Define observation." Ha Shurong said, "Controlled conditions." He said, "Supervised demonstrations." He said, "Documentation of what you perceive and what you absorb." Gu Xiaoyang said, and the access to resources would be contingent on that documentation being satisfactory to your researchers. Hua Shu Rong said, naturally the access would be commensurate with the contribution. Gu Xiaoyang was quiet for a moment. He said, you're describing a situation where I demonstrate my capabilities under your oversight in exchange for resources I could otherwise acquire through my own cultivation. Hua Shu Rong said, it's an efficient exchange. Gu Xiaoyang said, it's an exchange that involves my abilities becoming available to your researchers before they become fully available to me. Hua Shu Rong said, temporarily. Gu Xiaoyang said, no. He said it simply, without heat. Hua Shu Rong said, I'd encourage you to think about this more carefully. He said, the inner sect has multiple paths, and some of them are more comfortable than others. Gu Xiaoyang said, I've heard that framing before. He said, it never means anything good for the person it's directed at. He said, I appreciate you being direct about what you want. He said, I'm going to be equally direct about what I'm not willing to do. He said, my abilities are mine. He said, the research value of my abilities is mine to allocate. He said, I will not be allocating it to your faction through an arrangement that gives them priority access before I have it myself. He said, if that means some paths are less comfortable, I'll take the discomfort. Hua Shu Rong looked at him with the expression of someone recalibrating the firmness of an obstacle. He said, that's a strong position for someone who arrived here less than a month ago. Gu Xiaoyang said, yes. He said, I've had an eventful month. He picked up his training equipment and left. Behind him, he heard Hua Shu Rong say something to the senior disciples in a low tone. He did not turn around. He thought, that conversation will have consequences. He thought, some of them are going to be organized, and some of them are going to be informal, and I need to be ahead of both. He went to find Elder Shia and report the conversation in full, because she had told him to, and because he had decided that the intelligence she represented was one of his most valuable assets, more valuable than any orb, and that decisions about how to use it should be made together rather than alone. Elder Shia listened to the account of the conversation without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, he offered you vault access. He said, conditional vault access, yes. She said, that means he believes whatever is in the vault would be meaningful to you. He said, he seemed confident about it. She said, the inner sect vault has materials at levels well above your current cultivation stage. She said, ordinarily, access is stage-gated. He said, ordinarily. She said, he was offering to arrange non-standard access. He said, which suggests his faction has influence over vault management, which is useful to know. She said, yes. She said, it also suggests he believes that your absorption ability could be used to extract insight from materials above your stage. He said, I hadn't thought about that. He thought about it now. He said, I can absorb attribute orbs from any source I can perceive. He said, if there are attribute orbs associated with high-stage cultivation resources. She said, there are. She said, every cultivation material produces attribute orbs corresponding to its nature and quality. High-stage materials produce high-stage attribute orbs. He said, and if I could absorb those orbs, she said, you would gain insights above your cultivation stage without having developed the foundation to use them. He said, which would be, she said, dangerous. She said, possibly very dangerous. She said, the reason cultivation stages exist is to provide the structural capacity to hold and apply advanced insights. She said, absorbing insights beyond your structural capacity risks damage to the pathways that make cultivation possible. He said, but Hua Shu Rong thinks it would work. She said, Hua Shu Rong thinks it would work under controlled conditions with researchers observing and documenting the results. He said, researchers who are trying to understand how to do it without the risks. She said, or researchers who are comfortable with the risks because you are the one taking them. He sat with that. He said, that's a darker interpretation than I had been assuming. She said, it's the most logically consistent interpretation of what they're offering. He said, I appreciate you saying that directly. She said, you're making decisions that affect your safety. She said, You should have accurate information. She stood up. She said, continue your current path. She said, advance your cultivation through your own methods. She said, the faster you advance, the more of the vault's resources become legitimately available to you, and the less useful their offer becomes. He said, and if they decide not to wait for that, she said, then we will deal with that when it arrives. She said, for now, it hasn't arrived. He said, understood. He left. He went to the training ground and spent 2 hours on sword forms and thought about the shape of his situation, which was a faction inside the sect that wanted to use him, a faction of external cultivators that knew something unusual had happened in the mountains, an elder who was his most reliable ally and who had told him to advance faster than problems could organize, and an ability that was genuinely unprecedented and that therefore attracted the specific quality of attention that unprecedented things attract in competitive environments. He thought, I need to be strategic about this. He thought, but strategy without capability is planning without tools. He thought, capability first. He went back to the sword forms and tried the swallow return technique with the new adjustments he had made based on 3 weeks of Elder Xia's instruction, and found that the adjustments had made it significantly better. He ran it again. It was better still. He thought, I'm learning faster than I should be. He thought, I wonder if that's because the absorption gives me more than just attributes. If it gives me the capacity to absorb learning the same way it absorbs attribute orbs. He thought, I should ask Lin Zhonglao. He thought, but not today. Today there is too much else to do. He ran the form again. The evening light came in low and warm, and he was still practicing when the lamps came on, and his shadow moved against the training ground wall, and he looked like nothing special. Just another inner sect disciple, practicing alone, working toward something. Which was exactly what he was, except for all the parts that made him entirely unlike every other inner sect disciple, and those parts he was doing his best not to make visible. He would need them later. Right now, he needed the work.